Who came up with the way he looks?
Steve Ditko. Steve designed the character.
The colors?
Everything about the costume.
Spider-Man dons the classic red and blue, first brought to life by writer Stan Lee and artist Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko in the 1962 comic Amazing Fantasy, number 15. He quickly became everybody's favourite.
He's a menace to the entire city!
Well, almost everybody.
We tried to bring comics a little more into the real world. You know, I shouldn't really say this, but the chances are that possibly even you and I aren't perfect.
Amazing Fantasy featured one-off what-if type stories centered around some kind of rampaging monster, but for the final issue, number 15, Stan pitched instead the Spider-Man, a flawed teenager with relatable struggles and a strong sense of responsibility. Despite publisher pushback, doubt that a hero with real-world problems could help an audience escape their real-world lives, Amazing Fantasy 15 sold beyond expectation, and Spider-Man was given the go-ahead for its own series, The Amazing Spider-Man, published less than a year later in March of 1963. As you comic fans may know, Marvel have hit the reset button with their issue numbering on multiple occasions, but various iterations of Marvel's primary Spider-Man series still tally under one title. To date, The Amazing Spider-Man has over 900 issues, spanning 6 volumes, and yes, that excludes the Spidey spin-offs. But after 62 years of Spidey, things have got a little hard to follow, haven't they? Stick around and together we'll construct the ultimate Spider-Man timeline. But before we do, maybe drop a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and let me know in the comments which hero you want to see next. Let's go. The 60s. The early Spider-Man comic stories showcased Peter juggling life as a superhero around an air of constant misfortune in civilian life. Primary side characters included Aunt May, Flash Thompson, Liz Allen, and of course J. Jonah Jameson and Betty Brant. These issues introduced the mainstay villains Chameleon, Vulture, the Tinkerer, Doc Ock, Sandman, Lizard, Electro, Mysterio, Green Goblin, Kraven the Hunter, and Scorpion in that order. 1965 saw issue 31, Big Peter's graduation, moving on to Empire State University, introducing us to Gwen Stacy, Harry, and of course his father, Norman Osborn. Aside from the origin story we all know and love, 1966 gave us arguably the crowning moment of the Stan Lee Steve Ditko era. Issue 33 features a full-page spread depicting Peter's inner turmoil trapped underneath some machinery. And if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. Spider-Man Homecoming draws on this moment in its final act, whilst Peter, without the suit, thinks over what it really means to be the Spider-Man. As the 60s era draws to a close, artist Steve Ditko left Marvel, and John Romita would take the reins for a time going forward. Romita's era introduced Mary Jane Watson and penned villains Rhino, Shocker, Kingpin, and the Prowler. A side note before we move on, it was this era, in 1964, that the Sinister Six was first named. This was in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 1. It was also the 60s that saw Spidey first team up with the Avengers, the story where he's tasked to hunt down and bring in the Hulk. After tracking down the Hulk, he explains to Peter that he's always being hunted, for once just wants to be left alone. Spidey, for the Hulk, lies to the Avengers and tells them simply that he failed. The 70s. Stan Lee, as a writer, was contracted with Marvel to produce multiple comic series at a time. With some of his other stories coming to a close, Spider-Man's growing popularity was the answer to this problem. As such, the 70s saw a handful of Spidey spin-offs, notably Marvel Team Up, which I think is still running today, and I grabbed an issue a couple of years back, and of course Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, a separate series that would tell its own stories in the same established universe, a trend that would stick until this very day. You may know that early Marvel comics would each don the seal of the CCA, or Comics Code Authority, a regulatory board that would approve each issue to confirm that its theme and contents conform to outlined standards for public consumption. But in 1971, issues 96 to 98, some of the last to be written by Stan Lee, defied this standard. Lee was approached by none other than the US Department of Health to write a story about the dangers of drug use. Seeing this as an opportunity for Spidey to spread an important message, he penned a 3-part storyline that saw Harry Osborn hospitalised after overdosing on pills. Despite the lack of approval from the CCA, the issue sold well, and Marvel were praised for their bold decision. Ultimately, the CCA would allow new freedoms to comic writers in response to this going forward. So as Spidey changed the world outside of his own pages, Stan was moving to become Marvel's publisher. Jerry Conway would write the series going forward, along with Gil Kane taking over from Romita as his artist. Conway's first addition to Spidey's Rogues Gallery would be Morbius in issue 101, as part of the Six-Armed Saga, wherein Pete, struggling with the death of his friend's father, tries to remove his powers with a serum that accidentally destabilized his genetic mutation. This story was adapted as part of the '94 Spider-Man the Animated Series, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. Conway also introduced the villain Hammerhead with issue 113. It was a fairly familiar start for the new writer, but in 1973, Gill, Conway and Romita would deliver something groundbreaking. That's right, issue 121, the night Gwen Stacy died. Throwing Pete into the most human experience yet to touch the printers, the issues that followed saw him track the Goblin with a view to take revenge. In true Spidey fashion though, he was unable to make the kill, and as the Goblin calls his glider to impale him, much like in the 2002 Sony Spider-Man movie inspired by this scene, Spidey evades the device and the Goblin instead strikes himself. The rest of the 70s saw Kane succeeded by Ross Andru, and the Conway-Andru era introduced the Punisher in 1974 issue 129, and saw Harry step into the mantle of the Goblin through 135 to 137. This culminated in the introduction of Peter's clone for the first part of the Clone Saga with issue 147 through 149, while 50 would be Gill's last issue before Len Wein stepped into write, shortly after being succeeded by Marv Wolfman in 1978. Wolfman was joined by Keith Pollard as his artist, and together they detailed Pete and Mary Jane's early relationship troubles, as well as introducing Felicia Hardy, the Black Cat, in 1979, issue 194. The 80s. 80s Spidey kicks off with a return and subsequent death for the burglar who shot Uncle Ben, a scene that was also used in the movies. Dennis O'Neil and John Romita Jr. would write 2 annuals together featuring Doctor Strange and the Punisher, before Roger Stern, a prior writer for another Spider-Man series, would man the helm. Stern and Romita Jr. would create the Hobgoblin in 1983, issue 238, and reintroduce Mary Jane Watson, now a more mature and serious woman, across the rest of their run. 84 saw Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz take over the series, with notable moments including issue 257, where Mary Jane tells Peter that she knows he's Spider-Man, and issue 252, the first appearance of the black suit, of which he wore exclusively for 4 years, by the way. You'll notice that the cover art was drawn to closely resemble Spidey's first appearance, and there are a few times where this has happened throughout the years. 258 revealed the suit's origin as a symbiote. Various individuals worked over the next few years, concluding the Hobgoblin storyline, penning the marriage of Pete and MJ, before DeMatteis and David Michelini's Kraven the Last Hunt in 1987. Interestingly, the story was pitched to DC for a Batman spin-off, but when picked up by Marvel, ran as part of all of their current Spidey series simultaneously, a crossover event. The story depicts the death of Spider-Man at the hands of Kraven the Hunter. Kraven replaces Pete as a brutal and violent Spider-Man, but upon Pete's inevitable resurrection, Kraven quickly retires, declaring himself to have already won. Issue 298 in 1988 was the first to be written by comic artist superstar Todd McFarlane. Todd quickly redefined the standard for Spider-Man and introduced Venom to the Marvel world in the following issues. Todd drew Spider-Man on one condition, that he could draw him in the classic red and blue, and so the introduction of Venom, despite Spidey already being red of the symbiote, gave McFarlane reason to put Spidey back in his original threads. The 80s also saw the release of Web of Spider-Man, replacing Marvel Team-Up as the third active Spidey comic series. Early issues depict the suit attempting to rebond with Peter, and shows him using church bells to remove it, another scene that has been used in various ongoing Spider-Man media. Issue 18 depicts a moment where Pete's spider sense didn't respond to a blow from an unseen enemy. The writer later explained that this was ultimately used to tease Venom and his inability to trigger Pete's spider sense. Side note, 1984 produced my favourite Spidey story of all time, written by Roger Stern, The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, a story that shows Spidey visit a young boy who has collected various mementos from Spidey's endeavours. As Spidey gears up to leave, the boy asks him who he is. Shocked by the boy's admiration and feeling undeserving of it, Pete reveals his identity to the boy and explains how his failures have made him the person that he is today. The boy reassures him that he'll always be his hero. As Spidey swings away, the panel reveals that the boy was staying in a cancer clinic for the terminally ill. The 90s. The 90s saw Todd move over to his own project, another comic series self-titled Spider-Man, which would exist alongside the main Amazing Comics storyline, much as Web of Spider-Man had before. 92's issue 361 saw Carnage introduced into the main Spider-Man series, and in 94 Michelini ended his run on the book with the revelation that Peter's parents, who had returned 2 years earlier, were actually imposters. DeMatteis, the man behind Kraven's Last Hunt, came on to write for the series along with Mark Bagley, an artist who had won the 86 Marvel Tryout Contest and worked on a handful of smaller IPs at Marvel himself. 94 to 96 sees Amazing Spider-Man tell one of its more controversial stories. Owing back to the 70s storyline featuring a clone of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly returns to reveal that he is the real Spider-Man, Of course, this is eventually disproven, but not before Riley takes up the mantle of the Scarlet Spider, even having the various comic series renamed temporarily. In 1996, Bob Harris was made editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics and insisted on the comeback of fan favourite Peter Parker. It was in Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man comic series that they first made this change. Issue 75 by Mackie and John Romita Jr. sees Ben killed off in order for Peter to return. It was revealed that Norman Osborn had doctored the test results that had suggested Ben was the original Spider-Man. Various artists finished the run up until 1998 with the final issue, number 441. The 2000s. 1999 technically saw Marvel first relaunch the Spider-Man series. In January that year, the series was back with Pete in the suit as The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2. J. Michael Straczynski gave us the Spider Idol storyline. The first introduced the Web of Life and Destiny, suggesting that Peter's Spider-Bite was more than just a freak accident. The year 2000 saw the launch of Ultimate Spider-Man, a spin-off comic series that famously first retold the origin story separate to the Earth 616 continuity. Of course, in 2006, Spider-Man played a pivotal role in Marvel's company-wide Civil War storyline, revealing his identity to the public in a move that shocked readers across the globe. Later, in 2007, Marvel wrapped up its current side stories, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man and The Sensational Spider-Man, with the storyline crossing the three comic series together. One More Day sees Pete struggle with the aftermath of the Marvel Civil War, and in facing the possible death of Aunt May, makes a deal with Mephisto, the Marvel Devil, to rewrite a portion of his life, on the condition that he and Mary Jane were never to have married. Back in Black, a tie-in event across the three series, saw Peter briefly wear a cloth version of the black suit throughout this time as well. For the next few years, various writers and artists penned smaller stories using lesser-known characters from the Marvel Universe. With Spidey's secret identity again intact, we move to the next chapter of our tale. The 2010s. With Dan Slott writing solo from 2011, we got the Big Time storyline with issue 648. This sees Pete working at Horizon Labs and introduces a new armoured suit, given how his spider sense is ineffective against the Spider Slayers. Issue 654 first debuted Agent Venom as Flash Thompson doms a symbiote, and issue 666 started the Spider Island story, which sees all of New York turn into monsters. Pete teams up with Kane and Agent Venom to save the day. All the stories culminate in the Ends of the Earth, which sees Spider-Man facing off against the Sinister Six in an effort to stop Doc Ock from truly destroying the world. Dying Wish is the latter part of this chapter and ends with the setup for Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man shows us a dying Otto Octavius as he switches minds with Peter Parker, leaving Pete to die in his frail body. And it's a bloody good read, actually. I quite like Superior Spider-Man. There's a spread that depicts Otto living Peter's memories as they flood into his mind and completely overwhelming. He begs for Peter to switch back, but in the coldest Spidey moment to date, he hits him with a careful what you wish for type shtick and passes away in Otto's body. Ultimately, of course, Otto relinquishes the responsibility of Spider-Man back to Peter, but not before giving the crime fighting a good go himself. Following Superior Spider-Man, Marvel relaunched the series again in 2014, back with Pete in the suit, featuring various Spider-Verse crossovers throughout its run. 2015 gave us Secret Wars, which upon its conclusion inducted Miles Morales into the main 616 continuity, prior to which he'd been only a part of the Ultimate Universe 1610, where he first debuted in 2011's Ultimate Comics Fallout number 4. The Amazing Spider-Man has relaunched a further 4 times in the last 10 years. So, that's where we're at really. Sure, Spidey's still going. We've had Original Sin, which sees Nick Fury inherit the role of the Watcher, Dark Web, showing Ben Reilly reborn as the Evil Chasm, Game War, which brings back Tombstone as the big bad, and the upcoming 8 Deaths of Spider-Man, which sees Spidey don a new suit from Doctor Doom. But the prime-time, industry-changing era of Spider-Man in comics has decidedly come to a close. That first issue, Amazing Fantasy 15, in 2011 sold for $1.1 million, and it's the 5th most valuable comic book of all time. Spider-Man, to me, piqued readers' interest the way it did because he's just a normal guy, in a suit, doing what he thinks he has to. He works a job, has relationship problems, and carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. And it's funny, really, the very flaws publishers first thought would hold him back, the very essence of what made him so popular to begin with. I think I'll do a follow-up video very soon talking about the various other Spideys of the Manic Marvel multiverse. But until then, like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.